What's up, folks? This is Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards. As you can tell by the shelves behind me, I collect, play, and learn a lot of different RPGs. This gives me a somewhat unique perspective and allows me to identify similarities in mechanics across different systems. So today I'm going to do an RPG 101 video on some of the different popular game mechanics that you're going to find in RPGs that you may play. Hopefully, after watching this, you'll have a better idea of how these mechanics work and which mechanics that you haven't tried you might think are good for you and your group. So without any further ado, let's get over to the table and get into this. For our first mechanic, let's start off with the top, D20 Roll High. Most RPG players are going to be familiar with this, but if you're not, this is the core mechanic of most RPGs that players are going to start with. D&D, Old School Essentials, Morkborg, Everyday Heroes, the old Wizards of the Coast, Star Wars, so on and so forth. Basically any game where you're going to be rolling a d20 and trying to hit a target number. Now typically with the d20 Roll High, you're going to have a d20 to do most actions. You're going to add probably a skill and a stat, sometimes just a stat, and you are going to add that to whatever you roll. And if the die roll plus your modifiers equals or exceeds the target number, then you are going to be successful. A lot of times these games will include rules that add on to that, such as critical hits and critical fumbles, but the gist of it is roll a d20, add a couple numbers, and try to hit a target number. And next up we have the D100 Roll Under. You're going to find this system in Call of Cthulhu, Delta Green, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, Basic RPG, and RuneQuest, amongst others. The basic premise of these systems are typically that you're going to roll a D100 against a characteristic, sometimes a skill, sometimes a statistic, sometimes an attribute. Your success is going to be determined by rolling at or under your target, skill, attribute, characteristic, so on and so forth. And a lot of times there are game-specific methods of creating success levels. For example, Call of Cthulhu 7th edition has a fractional system where being the lower the fraction of your skill that you roll, the better the result. Whereas Fantasy Roleplay here, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the newest edition, you subtract the tens category from your target number versus what you actually rolled, and the difference is going to be your success level. An advantage of this system is that it is a true probability. It is very easy to see how many percentage points off you are from your success chances. It is fast in resolution. It's one of the oldest systems available, and it typically is going to be player-facing probability, meaning that you don't have to determine your target number by anything other than what is on your character sheet. You roll your 2 dice, 10 spot, 4, 1 spot, 0, 40. If my skill or attribute is 40 or over, I succeeded. If my attribute is under that, I failed. That simple. And after a couple of the oldest game mechanics in RPGs, we're going to go on to what is a relatively new one, only a little over a decade old, and that being the Powered by the Apocalypse system and other games inspired by that system. Now, this is going to be familiar to anybody that's ever played Dungeon World, Monster of the Week, Worldwide Wrestling. Also, games like City of Mist, Quest, Ironsworn, Starforged, Legacy of Cthulhu. These all take inspiration from this system. They might not use it exactly, but it's going to be clear that they drew some inspiration from the elements of this system. This system is typically going to be roll 2d6, add your mods, typically a skill and maybe equipment, and you're going to try to get a high roll. If you get a 7 and 9, you get a weak hit. If you get a 10 to a 12, you get a strong hit, and if you get a 6 or less, you missed. So you roll your 2d6, you add your mods, in this case 7, we'll say I had a +2, that's a 9, so I got a weak hit, and it's that simple. A weak hit typically is a yes but result, meaning you get what you wanted, but you have to pay a price. A 10 plus is going to usually be just an outright success with little or no consequences, and sometimes you get to do a little bit extra as well. Whereas a 6 or less is going to result in a miss, and typically that has narrative consequences as well as mechanical consequences. These games are great for telling stories, they're very flexible, and they are a wonderful way to abstract complex elements in your games. It is not a coincidence that the Powered by the Apocalypse system is used in so many different games nowadays. It is a very simple but flexible system that's capable of keeping your players' attentions and keeping them engaged in your game. Great choice. Another very popular mechanic used in several different games is going to be the D6 dice pool. There's a couple of different ways to do this. There is the mouse guard, burning wheel, torchbearer method, whereas you roll a pool of dice and you try to roll 4, 5, or 6. And then there's also the free league method where you're trying to get 6s. So we're going to go with the free league method here. Typically what you would be rolling would be a stat or attribute plus a skill, and that's how many dice you would have. So if I had perhaps we'll say an agility of 2 and a shoot of 2, I would add those together and I would be able to roll 4 dice. In the Free League Mutant Year Zero inspired systems, you would roll your 4 dice, and if you got any 6s, you would be successful. Now, with the Mutant Year Zero games, you will often have the option of pushing, meaning if you didn't roll any 6s, you could roll again to see if you get them the second time, but if you roll any 1s on the second time, you create consequences for yourself. If we were going to do the same thing in a mouse guard, burning wheel, torchbearer type D6 dice pool, we would add a stat and a skill. We would roll, and anything that is a 4, 5, or 6 would be a success. These games are quite simple. Often everybody is going to have extra D6s rolling around in board game boxes somewhere, so that makes it a little bit cheaper. And typically the games are going to have very simple gameplay elements that keeps the action flowing and represents out of combat actions as well as it does combat. This makes for a system that will play fast at the table, doesn't take much time to explain, and is going to be able to cover a lot of different genres, hence why every Free League game is sitting on my shelf. Another game mechanic that certainly has its fans and its wide variety of games that it's used in is the Fate system. This is also known as the Fudge system, as it was originally called. This system is going to use some special dice, though you could use regular 6-siders. Basically, these dice have half the results with minuses, half the results with pluses. And anytime that you perform an action, you would compare your approach or skill, depending on the version of Fate that you're playing, and you would roll 4 dice, you would add the pluses and subtract the minuses, and you would move your result up or down what they call the ladder. And the ladder is going to have very cleverly named adjectives. +8 would be legendary, +7 epic, so on and so forth. Your skills or approaches have similar names, and you try to beat the opposition. So if, for example, I was fighting with somebody that had fair swordplay, then I had perhaps good, and I rolled my 4 dice. I would add the pluses and subtract the minuses, and I would either go up above my good or down below my good. And as long as I'm above where my opponent was, I would be successful. Fate is used in several different games. There is Fate of Cthulhu. There is an accelerated version of Fate that is extremely light. Condensed has a little bit more meat on the bones than accelerated, but it's still very light. There is the Fate core system. It's been used for The Princess Bride. It's been used for Fate of Cthulhu. and the Dresden Files, as well as Dresden Files accelerated role-playing games. But the gist of all these systems is you take your skill or approach, you add your pluses to it, you subtract your minuses, and that's where your result ends up. It keeps the results very bound to a narrow scale of results and takes a lot of the randomness out of the games that you're playing. That said, Fate is an excellent game system to do very complex cinematic things with a simple mechanic. It is very satisfying to play through a Fate-based game knowing that the mechanics are not going to get in the way of having a good time at the table. Players that really like crunch and like to be very specific and simulationist probably are not going to enjoy Fate as much, but those that just want to chuck some dice, do some crazy stuff, and have a good time, Fate may be right up your alley. This next system is one that I had not used much until fairly recently. This mechanic I call the D20 Roll Under. It's used in games like Dragonbane, Sharp Swords, and Sinister Spells, the Black Hack, amongst others. It is a favorite of indie developers producing light RPGs. And the gist of it is you roll a d20, you add or subtract some mods, and you try to get lower than or equal to a target number. If you do, that's a success. Now, with this, some of the advantages are that often the target number is going to be right on your character sheet. It's going to be a skill or an attribute that you're trying to roll under. It limits some of the questions to the GM about what is the AC or what is the difficulty number, what's the target number I have to hit, because a lot of times these are sitting right on the character sheet in front of the players. It allows them to more easily analyze what they want to do on their turn. Probability is fairly easy because it's D20, everything's 5% increments, and it's going to be somewhat familiar to players that have used the D20 roll over system because the mechanics are basically just a flipped version of the same system. This next set of mechanics isn't quite as tightly related as the others in this video. I'm calling this my mixed dice pool game. These are going to be games where you grab a group of different types of dice and try to attain success by rolling them all together. I'm going to talk specifically about the Pathfinder Swayed version of this, though if you're interested in seeing a different version, you can check out my Sentinel Comics video. That being said, there's also games like Cortex and the Marvel Superheroes game by Margaret Weis Productions that use mixed dice pool as well. With Savage Worlds, you're going to have a skill or trait that is going to be defined by a die type. We'll say that we've got a D8, and you're going to have a wild die. You're going to be rolling for a target number. Typically that number is going to be a 4. You roll your 2 dice, and you try to get a 4 or better on one of them. You're not counting both of them, you're just counting one. If you roll the max number on either of the dice, you do what's called acing. So you get to roll again and add it to the result. So I had a 6 plus a 1, got a total result of a 7, which is more than a 4, so I succeed. If I would have succeeded by more than 4, so if I would have got an 8, then I would have actually got what's called a raise, which creates additional bonuses and benefits. Advantages of this system include that the number is very obvious because you're only going to have a couple of dice typically that you're working with, 2 to 3 generally, 2 for Savage Worlds, sometimes more in very specific situations. With Sentinel Comics, you're usually going to have 3. And you're going to be able to apply this to every conceivable genre. The math is simple. It informs the narrative with the success levels, and the exploding dice in Savage Worlds in particular leaves a lot of wild results on the table for possibilities. This makes the game play very fast, fun, and furious, as the tagline says. And this next mechanic group that I'm going to be talking about is what I call the 3d6 Roll High. You're going to see this mechanic in games like Dragon Age, Fantasy Age, there's a Cthulhu-based Age game, and also surprisingly, Marvel Multiverse role-playing is quite similar, though not identical, to the Age system. In the Age system, you're going to be rolling your 3d6 and adding your mods, and you try to hit a target number. If you roll doubles on any of the 3 dice, you get a special effect that is able to generate stunt points, which allow you to buy additional benefits for your action. So in this case, you would generate a number of stunt points equal to the off-color die if you got doubles on your result. With Marvel Multiverse, you roll 3d6, and the off-color dice is going to be your Marvel die, which generates damage, and also if you roll a 1 on the Marvel die, that can generate critical hits, and it always counts as a 6 rather than a 1, which skews your chances for success upwards because you effectively have 2 6s on that die. That, of course, is only for the Marvel. The benefits of the 3d6 roll high are going to be that, again, math is simple. It's just 3 dice. The result diversity is very good. There is a great spread in the probability with 3d6 results. Also, it's going to feel a little bit weird and uncommon, and players sometimes like to have a little bit of that weirdness in the mechanics to make it feel fresh and fun for them. Fantasy Age and Marvel Multiverse role-playing game are two that I enjoy very much, and you should give them a try if you have not. And now we have the 3d6 roll under. You're going to find this in Gerps, Dungeon Fantasy, which is powered by Gerps, and typically you're going to roll your 3d6 with mods. You're going to compare to a characteristic, a skill, or an attribute, and you have to roll equal to or under that number in order to be successful. This is able to be applied across multiple genres. It's got unlimited bolt-on mechanic options between all of the different splat books available for GURPS. It uses D6 again, so very easy to come across those if you need more. And it is typically going to be a player-facing target number because you're rolling against a characteristic that's on your sheet. All of that said, GURPS is not going to be for everyone, but the folks that really enjoy GURPS tend to use it for everything that they do, and I can see where that appeal would be there. That being said, your miles may vary. And last but not least, I have what I call the 2d6 target number method. This is going to be used primarily in Traveler, though the Without Number series, Worlds Without Number, Stars Without Number, Cities Without Number, also uses this for the skill system. And for this, you're going to roll 2d6 plus your mods and try to hit a target number. If you're equal to or greater than, you get a success. These are going to be fairly simple probabilities because 2d6, the probability tables are very easy to remember and memorize, especially if you've been a war gamer like myself. The d6s are common to any collection, and the target numbers are typically going to be very common throughout the game. So, for example, an average difficulty might be an 8, a difficult might be a 10, and an easy might be a 6. So it's going to be easy to do things on the fly without having to worry about target numbers being off or the math being skewed. This is a simple system. There's a reason why it's been around for as long as it has. Traveler's been around since the 70s using a system very similar to this, and I think that that should say something about the viability of it overall. The 2d6 target number system is going to be one that everybody can learn very quickly. It may not be for everyone, though. You don't want to go with a lot of adds or subtractions when you're only rolling 2d6. The probabilities can skew quite rapidly just based off of 1 or 2 points. So this is going to be one that if you like it, you're really going to like it. If you don't, there's plenty of other options out there as we've gone over in this video. All right, folks, so that was my video on the game mechanics that power your favorite RPGs. If anybody has played a variation of some sort of all of the different mechanics I talked about in the video, I'd love to hear your thoughts and see if maybe you disagree with any of my comments on the different mechanical families that I'm talking about here. Also, if you enjoyed the content, please be sure to drop a like and subscribe to the channel. So until next time, this has been Justin from Books, Bricks, and Boards. Good gaming, and God bless.